This is the Read, Write, and Create podcast, the podcast where you get a bite-sized session of creative writing coaching from me, Lori L. Tharps. I'm a storytelling evangelist who moved to the south of Spain so I could live a global literary life. I'm also an award-winning author of both fiction and nonfiction, a journalist, and a former college professor. I created this podcast because I want to help as many BIPOC writers as possible get their stories out of their heads and into the world. Are you ready? Let's go. Hello, wordsmiths, storytellers, and scribes. On episode 39 of the podcast, I am so excited to share with you my conversation with memoirist, journalist, editor, celebrity collaborator, novelist, and all-around literary icon, Veronica Chambers. Veronica Chambers is a New York Times bestselling author of over 25 books and is currently the editor of narrative projects at the New York Times. Born in Panama and raised in Brooklyn, her work often reflects her Afro-Latina heritage. Her first book, the acclaimed memoir Mama's Girl, has been course adopted by hundreds of high schools and colleges throughout the United States. She has also authored several children's books, including Shirley Chisholm is a Verb. Veronica co-wrote Yes, Chef with Marcus Samuelsson and Between Harlem and Heaven, a collection of recipes inspired by the culinary intersections between the Asian and African diaspora in American cuisine. That book won the James Beard Award for Best American Cookbook in 2019. Veronica has also worked on several celebrity collaboration projects with the likes of Robin Roberts and Michael Strahan. She has also edited popular anthologies about Beyoncé and Michelle Obama, and she has written both adult and YA novels. A graduate of Bard College at Simon's Rock, she was a 2017 John S. Knight Fellow in Journalism, Entrepreneurship, and Innovation at Stanford University. During our amazing conversation, Veronica pulls back the curtain on what has worked and what has not worked over the course of her 30-plus year career. She talks candidly about money, time management, and failure. She also shares useful tips and ideas about all the important in-between stuff that writers can do to build a successful and sustainable career. We also spend time talking about the subject of Veronica's latest book, Ida in Love and Trouble, a fascinating historical novel that sheds light on Ida B. Wells's early life as a young woman before she became an anti-lynching crusader and the quote-unquote princess of the press. Turns out, the bookstagrammers are comparing Ida in Love and Trouble to Bridgerton, just to give you a taste of what that book is about. So we talk about that too. Get ready to get schooled by one of the best in the game. I really hope you enjoy our conversation. Welcome to the Read, Write, and Create podcast, Veronica Chambers.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here talking to you about three of my favorite things.
Awesome. So usually when I start this show, I always like to kind of give a little bit of background about, why I wanted you on the show to, set the listeners up for what to expect. But this is the first time I'm going to do something a little bit different, Veronica. We've known each other for a long time, so I hope you take what I'm about to say with absolute love, understand where it's coming from. But when I asked your publicist to send over a bio for you, and this is obviously this current publicist is working with you for your new book, Ida in Love and Trouble. And the bio they sent was pretty short. And it said, just going to quote a tiny bit here, it said that you wrote the acclaimed memoir Mama's Girl, which has been course adopted by hundreds of high schools and colleges. That's the first book of yours that I read and loved so many years ago. And it also says she has authored several children's books, including the New York Times bestselling Finish the Fight, Call and Response, Shirley Chisholm is a Verb, and The Go-Between. Great. However, Veronica Chambers, you are the most writingest writer I know. You have written so many books, fiction, nonfiction, collaborating with celebrities, young people's books, young adult, grown up. on every topic imaginable. And so I'm like, are you like leading a double life or something? Or you're trying to stay on the down low with how amazing you are? Can you explain to the people why I got this little tiny biography for somebody whose bio I would have expected it to be like 7 pages long? Tell the people what's the secret. What are we doing here with the down low of how awesome you are?
Oh my God, that's so funny. So this is the thing. It's funny. I know that the whole arc of my writing career seems like a lot, right? Like, I was thinking about the fact that I was like for a little while a radio correspondent for BBC. I had a magazine career. I've wrote for TV for a couple of years. I did those celebrity memoirs. But, to me, they're all sort of chapters, to use the book metaphor. And I think the bio that they shared really reflects the chapter I'm in, which is I'm writing for young people, but I think that my most recent book, Ida in Love, is really my first attempt at historical fiction and a kind of new sort of path I'm trying to carve for myself. So I don't know. I mean, I think there's the like zoom out, but I'm a very zoom in person because partly because my life is so busy. I'm like pointillism. I only do a little bit of one thing at a time. That is my life.
I love that. That's actually, again, this podcast is really meant to be inspirational and informational for our writers listening. And it's really my intention to always bring on writers who have had a long career. And it's always good to hear how writers structure to have a long career. And what you just said is quite interesting in that maybe, you've gone through stages and you focus on one thing at a time, but that doesn't mean you can't do different things over time. So, what has been, just taking it back a little bit, what was your initial inspiration to write? Like, how did you see in the beginning, before you had written anything, before you published Mama's Girl, what was your like writer plan? What did you want to do as a writer?
That's a great question. That takes me like way back. It's funny. I immediately pictured myself in my apartment in Brooklyn Heights, 25 years ago. And, I think it's important to say that when I look back as a child, I can see that I saw the world through writing. But, I'm first generation Panamanian American. I was born in Panama. I came to the US when I was 5. My parents had a really hard life. I didn't know anyone who had been a writer. I didn't think writing was for me. I always loved reading. And, even on like my Instagram account, I always put that I'm a reader first because I feel like that's my most important job. And I feel like it's the lens with which I view the world and the people I love and how I want to interact in that world. So I was a reader for a really long time. And then I went to college and I thought, like so many people do, that I wanted to be a lawyer. And it wasn't until I had many jobs in college. I worked in the library. I worked in the cafeteria, which sucked. I worked as a babysitter. I worked at the switchboard because there was a switchboard in the 90s in college. And one of my jobs was tutoring in Spanish. And I met a girl. I was tutoring someone in Spanish, and she used to write for a magazine that was called YM, which I think was short for Young Miss. And it was really the first time that I'd met someone who was a published writer, but also a teenager. And so this is like a very personally famous story to me, is that I was like, oh, I would love to get a job at a magazine. And she was like, well, YM is never going to hire 2 interns from the same school. You should try for 17 or something like that. And I called 17 and I didn't have any experience and they said no. So I knew that our school had like an interterm break. Basically, we had January off and you could get 4 credits for doing something in January. Maybe it was 2 credits or something. So the school went till mid-December and then we started in February, but you could do like a January, whatever. And so I came home to New York. I'm from Brooklyn. And I sat with the New York City telephone book and opened it to magazines and called every magazine starting with an A and asked about internships. And Everyone told me no. Did I work at a college newspaper? I went to a small college. There wasn't a newspaper. Like I had nothing, had dust. And then I got to S and this must have taken me at least a week, but I think I probably put in 6 hours a day. I've always been very focused and disciplined with my time because I always felt like, I didn't have money. I didn't have connections. I didn't have anything, but I had my time and I was not going to waste it. So I called every magazine and Automobiles Inc. or whatever it was called. Hi, I'm a college student. I'd love to get an internship at a magazine. Do you have any? Sometimes it was just click. Sometimes they transferred me sometimes I went to voicemail. I got to S and it was a magazine called Sassy, which at the
I
time
love
was super new.
Sassy.
And the person transferred me to the managing editor, which is crazy. She picked up her phone and she said, "Why don't you come in for an interview?" And I did. And, it turned out Sassy was run not quite like all the other magazines were at the time. It was like chaos. I think they had just moved offices and they were unpacking boxes and they were like, "Can you work for nothing?" And I was like, "Wait, what kind of job is it that you work for nothing?" But I literally remember like looking around. It was like a movie, like Down with Love or Funny Face, and it's like this Madison Avenue kind of office. And I'm from like, East Flatbush, Brooklyn, which at the time is like very crack infested. And I'm looking at all these like super well dressed, mostly women in heels, clicking around. And there's like a moment of connection, like right away. I was like, oh, most of these women and young women can afford to work for almost nothing or nothing. And that was one of my first big insights into publishing and magazines, was what a genteel world it was. At that time, this is in 1989, and I was 18. It must have been 18. And at that time, Jackie Kennedy, then Jackie Onassis, was working at Doubleday. I looked around and I was like, oh, this is a business where a lot of people have money. And so I actually asked my family for Christmas if they could give me car fare and lunch so that I could do this 4-week internship. And I did. And I did really well. I published my first thing. And at the end of the internship, it turned out I had a ton of credits and I kind of got headhunted. I can't remember how it happened exactly, but 17 Magazine invited me to come for the semester. And by the end of that semester, I was 18 years old and they gave me a column. They gave me this cute boy column called Guy Talk. And I would like interview like a celebrity. And it was like 300 words and they paid me $300. And at that time, minimum wage was $3.25. So I literally could quit 5 of my little jobs on campus to write 300 words. I have been vastly underpaid as a writer at times in my life, but at 18, being paid $300 a month by 17 was kind of great. So it made a huge difference in my life. So it's a long story. It was a long answer to a short question.
No, but that was such a you're talking to writers. I always find it funny when writers are like, "Oh my God, did I talk too much?" Or I'm like, that's what we live for, these long rambling stories. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in this business, right? I mean, short answers don't give good stories. So that is the best story ever. And you just took me down such delicious memory lane. Sassy, may she rest in peace. I loved Sassy magazine. So because you have done so much and you started in magazines, wrote a memoir, but then moved on to writing so many different types of work. And you already said that you kind of have segments of your life where you're maybe focused on one thing or the other. How do you decide? And when I say decide, it's a kind of a combination about decision, but also courage. Like, how do you go from, I wrote a memoir, now I'm going to write young adult novels, or I'm going to do celebrity memoirs with chefs. Like, you've done such disparate things. And I just wonder, where do you get the courage to allow yourself to dip into other genres of writing?
I think courage is in and of itself a singular conversation, right? And I think that the courage that I've exhibited in my career is really indicative of the courage with which I live my life. And so I have a teenage daughter, and this is something that I'm always telling her. And I didn't make this up. A lot of people say this, but I'm like, how you show up for one thing is how you show up for everything, right? And so I think really early on, I made an effort to show up with a lot of integrity at these internships, a lot of humility, a lot of willingness to do a lot of hard work. I think at times, honestly, there have been points where I feel like it was to my detriment. I am a Black Latina woman. I think being first generation meant that sometimes I was overly grateful for opportunities. And so I'm just going to put that in a little parking lot corner that I think you have to be humble, you have to work hard. But I think that also means that sometimes people take a little bit of advantage, and really you can give a lot and not get a lot in return. So there's that. I think that if I had to go back, I would say really like 20 like flexion points I can look at on the timeline of my career and say, you should have negotiated a little bit better. Or maybe that's one you could have walked away from. I think, honestly, I've just been in the yes business for so long. And then again, I think it's hard to know without hindsight. So obviously, it's like the old Maya Angelou book, wouldn't take anything from my journey now. My feet are not on backwards, as August Wilson used to say. But for the perspective of people who are in the midst of their career, whether it's beginning of a more storied senior career or beginning of a starting out in creativity at 65 career, I would say two things. Your creativity is on one track, and how you take care of yourself and how you're paid and how you're treated is on another track. And don't be so hungry to make the first track go, to like make a name for yourself, to get the opportunity, that you don't take care of yourself. Obviously, you have to be willing to put some sweat equity in, but when you start to build or when you are in the midst of building, don't be afraid to ask for more, because I do think that's something that I really struggled with. And I'll give an example. I'll give an example and I'll give a counterexample. One of the collaboration books I worked on, which I will not say the name of, but since I've written 30 books, hopefully it'll not get me in trouble. I ended up working on this book for almost 2 years. I had a pretty major illness in the midst of it. I took this book on because I really cared about the subject and about the storyline. In the end, I would say I made less than 20,000 for a 2-year project. And I'm talking about money because I think we don't talk about money, but if you go back and you read all those publishing paid me things about BIPOC writers, this is just an example that I have been someone who's been underpaid. So I wrote a book where I made less than $10,000 a year. And when you divide that with paying taxes, you can think about what I took home. And I'm working on this for 2 years, and I'm doing other things because, my life does not run on $7,000 a year or 6,500 or whatever that is after taxes. And then you have to think agent commission. So even that, so it's 30% for taxes and my agent takes 15%. So I'm making 55% of that. So let's say $5,500 a year. And when I got sick and needed some time off, this person read me for filth, and in a way that, like, to this day, I'm just like, how? Like, how can you treat me this way? And it was a big success for them. And so, you know what I mean? Like, there's all kinds of things. No, I shouldn't have said yes to that little money, despite the fact that this person didn't have a budget and, had their own whatever. I let their problems become my problems. Two, I should have. It's always hard to know when to walk away when you're in the middle of a creative project. But really, that was a moment when I had an illness that I was dealing with. I should have said, if you cannot give me an extension, then you need to move on past me. And I should have not thrown good time after bad time. But, I was thinking, I don't have my next thing lined up. I'm really someone who completes things. I can do it. And I really did not take good care of myself. So that's just an example of that. All the things that I think are important to remember, taking care of yourself. At that point, I'd written bestsellers, I'd won awards, and yet I still let somebody talk me into doing something for so little money because it was like a passion project. And then I let them treat me badly when my health was at stake. And I hold that and I'm like, oh, let me not do this again. And of course, you don't learn a lesson all at once, but it stands out to me in the arc of things as emblematic. If you say to me, point to 20 points along the last 25 plus years of being a writer, that would be one where I'd be like, oh, sis, just don't do it. Or now is the time to cut bait. Like it's not, that little bit of money is not going to make a difference in your life and things might be rough, but you'll figure it out. So there's that. But then on the other hand, in terms of where the humility, the showing up, the everything pays off, right after I got married in the early 2000s, I got a call from Bowdoin College and they said, it's so funny because I haven't talked to them in years, so I'm sure it's fine to say this. I think Richard Ford was supposed to be the writer in residence, and he had dropped out, and it was like August. It might have been July, end of July. Let's just say generously, it was end of July, and school was starting right after Labor Day. And they said, do you have any interest in being a visiting writer? And I'd never been to Maine. And I spoke to my new husband, and I was like, it's a semester. But my husband was working in New York, and they offered me a set amount of money. And this goes to the other side, right? The other thing is that they kind of made it clear that they'd been to like 10 other writers before me. And so this is to the flip side of the, stand up for what you're worth. The amount of times where I've seen people be like, this person or this organization or this publication offered me an assignment, but they had gone to all these other people and they came to me late and I'm so insulted and I'm going to say no. And I'm like, wow, are you really going to be so insulted when I hear you so often say, this is what you want to do? This is what you love to do. So they were kind of like, it is a little late and a lot of people have said no. And I'm like, I am happy to be number 12 on your list. I'm happy to be on your list at all. And they did this thing where they said, look, so they offered me this money and I thought it seemed like a good amount of money for a semester. It really worked for me. And so I was like, should I negotiate? I was like, you know what? I'm happy with it. So I said, I'm happy to take this offer. I said, I need to, rent a house or an apartment because just coming first semester. And they said, yes, well, we'll give you something towards that. And we will carve off a little bit of like a moving budget they had to help faculty move. And they said, so your husband can fly up and see you. And so I had a budget and my husband, it wasn't an expensive flight. Maybe it was $150 or $200 round trip. But, that was still something. Not everybody has that all the time. And so I lived in Maine on this little house by the water. I taught 4 days a week and started Monday night. I taught a class for 3 hours and I was done by Thursday at noon. And then I just wrote Thursday through Monday. It was perfect. And my husband came up every other week. And, a dean I knew at another college said to me, I heard that you were super gracious through the negotiation process. Like it was a fair amount. They offered you a little more for like expenses. And it's a good reputation builder sometimes to be the person who's not always going to be like, I'm going to get every penny out of you. So, you can hold both things. And I just like to talk about it because I think the practicality again in how you show up. It's like you can take care of yourself, but you also have to know these are creative spaces and there's something to showing up with grace. And I got a lot out of that. I got a lot out of that professionally and creatively. And I just grew so much that semester.
Thank you for sharing these stories, Veronica, because there's so much about the writing life that we don't necessarily talk about. The things like getting a visiting writer's teaching position. What a joy. I was imagining you in your little cabin by the lake in Maine writing. Like, we have to know how these things happen. How do they work? Like, how does one have this long career? It's not just grinding, doing the same thing over and over again. And in order to have the kind of career where people invite you, like you hear about these things, but like, well, how does it happen? How does it work? How do I get in these rooms or these positions? And you're showing us what it takes and how to behave in a way, like how to incorporate that into a writer's life. And that's what I really want to help people do, is create a writer's life, not just have one book that sells well, not just be like the one-time bestseller even. It's to have a writer's life. And that can look like so many different things. So I'm super grateful that you're sharing these stories. And I want to ask also though, have you always had a 9 to 5 in addition to your writing? How have you managed the kind of life part, the work, the income? Talk about your professional things that are happening alongside the books that you're writing.
I have kind of gone back and forth between full-time jobs, fellowships, and freelancing. I would say there's been like 5 and 10 year sprints. I do think that my current job, I'm an editor for projects and collaborations at the New York Times. I I really came to it at a point where I had recently re-listened to Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert,
One of my favorites.
and with good reason. And I think that I felt that there's something she said there about not making her work have to pay for itself or something. And I just really, honestly, to the point of having done all those celebrity collaborations, I co-wrote 5 New York Times bestsellers, and that seemed like enough. You know what I mean? And unless this was like the joy of my life, I really wanted to get back to my own work, and a full-time job was a great way to do that. I think the Times has fed my creativity and my intelligence. I was also feeling very strongly that I didn't want to get older and not get smarter. I had the great opportunity to interview Toni Morrison 3 times on stage at the Free Library. I know, it's like, I just think about her all the time. I'm like, our Miss Morrison, who art in heaven, she gave us so much, you know? And I just remember there was a moment when I was interviewing her and I thought, what do I need to do to be in the other chair in 40 years? And I just thought, I have to keep growing. I have to keep getting smarter. And I was really lucky because, to the point of that kind of Bowdoin opportunity, I have a friend who runs a department at Stanford where he teaches journalism. His name is Tom Hayden. He's amazing, to scientists. And so if you are a science student at Stanford, you can do a 5th year and get a master's in communication in the earth sciences school. And he was looking for someone to teach for a semester. And I have to say, that one I lost money on. Like, my daughter was like in 7th grade. We really had a life in New York. But I love Stanford. I had been a fellow there the year before. And I thought, you know what? I can make 4.5 months work with the adjunct salary, but it basically paid for itself as a writing retreat, because then I had to pay to, fly my family out or fly back or whatever. But it was an amazing opportunity for me because I got to teach writing to science writers. I'm a little bit of a science nerd. I feel like if I had it all over again, I would have done a master's in science and I would be a science writer. Like, I collaborate sometimes with the science team at the New York Times, and it is a dream of mine. I mean, I don't know how many dreams I have ahead of me. Right now, I'm in my historical fiction era, but I do feel like I did a big Octavia Butler project, and I know that science fiction is not science, but I think some point that I would love to write something that is very science based. Maybe it would be historical fiction or something like that. But I taught writing to scientists and I read science writing and I made a curriculum. You know how they have the best American short stories? They do a collection as well called Best American Science and Nature Writing. And I love reading it because it is one of my weaknesses as a writer, like the natural world. Like, I'm not someone who, I write a lot of dialogue. I really think about people a lot and spaces, but in terms of just like, I'm looking out at my little tiny postage stamp backyard and I'm thinking about the trees and stuff. And, that was something Toni Morrison was so good at. In one of her interviews, she said something about how she could spend hours just talking about different kind of species of flowers and plants and farming. And she was so good at that. So anyway, it was a great semester. It was one of those break even years. as opposed to really making money years. But it was out of that semester that I ended up applying for a job at the New York Times. And I actually did not get the first job I applied, just to remind people that rejection is part of the game. It is, it's like watching like Naomi Osaka walk off the court at the US Open. It's like losing its part of the game. So I did not get the first job I applied for at the New York Times, but I got the second. And it was part of that thing of coming out of being at Stanford, being with scientists every day, wanting to learn new things, wanting to be smarter, trying to earn my place in that other chair, that I decided to do this new job.
I love how you're kind of forecasting for us, how you plan out your life, how you plan out this writer's life, that a writer's life does not look the same, and that it can develop, and it can develop based on your own interests. So you said you were in your historical fiction era. So let's jump to the woman of the moment, which is the subject of your latest book, Ida in Love and Trouble, which is about Ida B. Wells. And I thought I knew Ida B. Wells. I've been an Ida B. Wells fan since like 2017 when we did a whole conference about her at Temple University. But after reading your book, and I was like, I did not know everything about Ida B. Wells. And the book is called Ida in Love and Trouble. And the Ida in Love part of the book really paints her as this young woman who's interested in romance and is living this amazing life. And you really humanized her. And I feel like that must have been your intention, is to show us the other part of Ida B. Wells, who's not a anti-lynching crusader. There's a lot of books about Ida B. Wells already in the world. What was your intention? What was your inspiration for writing this incredible book?
So I always knew about Ida's anti-lynching campaign. I knew about her as a pioneer of investigative journalism. But then in 2019, I was assigned to lead coverage of the suffrage anniversary that was coming in 2020, when women were given the vote. And I realized I didn't know a lot about suffrage. And one of the things that I learned really early on, I did, for these projects, I do a ton of research. And one of the things that I learned was that, suffrage wasn't just Susan B. Anthony and white women in white dresses, that Ida B. Wells was a suffrage, like that she had the suffrage club. And so I learned two things: that suffrage was an umbrella of everything that mattered to women, because if you couldn't vote, you couldn't protect your life or lead your life or design your life or any of the things without it. And then I realized that women of color weren't often called suffragists because they were often taking on two things at a time. So Native American women were looking at land rights and the things that kind of forced schooling and assimilation and kidnapping of Native children, and, as well as like pure out decimations of tribes at the same time that they were trying to fight for the right to vote. So I think I got even deeper into Ida in 2019 because I was like, oh, the Alpha Suffrage Club and all this stuff. And I had always been a big fan of Paula Giddings, who wrote Ida, Sword Among Lions, partly because when I was 16, someone gave me a copy of When and Where I Enter. And I just remember taking the bus from my college in Massachusetts to New York and sitting at the back of the bus and just weeping, having read that book, because it opened my eyes to so much. It's like that James Baldwin quote, like, you think your pain is unique and personal, and then you read, And so when I had the opportunity to have a conversation with Miss Giddings, and she said to me, if you're really looking for Ida's voice, look to the Memphis Diaries, which I had not read. And the Memphis Diaries are the diaries that Ida kept in her early 20s, when she was just starting out her freelance writing career, when she was a teacher in Memphis. And that's when I think the book just started to come alive in my mind. And, I think a lot of people will identify with this. I used to Google Ida B. Wells historical novel because I was like, it's going to come up. Like, there's some announcement, some big writer has something coming. And, this is 5 years ago. And in my mind, I just started seeing it. And I think sometimes writers say this: you feel like there's something there that's really for you, because Obviously, I'm no Ida Wells, but I started that little career and I used to send out freelance pitches like every week. And I loved the editors who had helped me. And, you read Ida saying, I need to be edited. I need to, because sometimes I would just publish her editorials. And she knew she was 24, 25, which is when I was really in the starting gates of my career. And she knew that she wasn't as good as they sometimes said she was. She wanted to get better. And at the same time, she's working these long hours teaching. And I really identified with that. I work so much, that feeling of like bone tired. So I think it started to come alive for me there. And I wrote too much because I was trying to take her. She's born slightly before emancipation. And I was trying to take it to 1920 because I spent so much time covering when women got the vote, which is like 50 something years. So I had this come to Jesus moment and I realized I really needed to focus. And I decided to focus on the years between 22, when she's a young teacher in Memphis, and ending at 32, when she gets married and she becomes editor of the Chicago Defender. And I needed to focus, and that ended up being the book.
I was going to ask, what was your source material? Is the Memphis Diaries a published book, or that's something in her archives?
No, it's a published book. You can get it on Amazon, though I advise you to buy it from your favorite independent bookstore.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you. What I don't understand, though, Veronica, is why, and maybe I'm misunderstanding, but why is this being considered a book for young adults? Or did I make that up? Is it in the category of young adults? Because it didn't give me young adult vibes at all.
So it's a young adult publisher, but I really just wrote the book I wanted to write. I mean, I think there's two things happening. I think in the world of young adult, they're really thinking past school age. They're thinking like early life as one thing. I think that's interesting. But also, it's funny because some of the Bookstagram people compare it to Bridgerton. And they're like, it's giving a little Bridgerton vibes. And, I think there's something, I wanted it to feel like lively and romantic and all the things that I love in historical fiction, like Jane Austen and Edith Wharton and Gore Vidal and all that sort of stuff. So,
I mean, I'm not going to fight the Bridgerton crowd, but I totally get it. I totally get it, because that's what I mean when I say that I thought I knew Ida B. Wells, but I still thought of her as this firebrand, who was already ready to fight. But you softened her so much, which again, it's not like that wasn't the fiction of it. So I really liked seeing Ida in that context. I was going to ask you about the research process of it, but again, knowing that you had that source material, my follow-up question to that is just, you said you wrote the book you wanted to write. Who do you want to read this book? Who are you hoping reads this book?
I want to say something about the structure because it's really funny. A lot of people think the letters in the book are from Ida's archive. So the diary entries are from Memphis Diaries. And I think I say that afterwards. I wrote all of the letters. So I went down such a rabbit hole of Victorian era letter writing. You have no idea.
I don't, because there's half the book is like letters and they're so juicy and good. I was like, oh, these she had. It's no. Veronica, you are incredible.
So I mean, that's one of the things that I was proud of. And one of the things that I got from Miss Morrison was that I remember sitting in that chair opposite her, and she said it to a lot of people, but I really heard it because I was right there, is that she used to read every word of a book that she wrote out loud before she published it. And I always thought, oh, no, one, I don't really like the sound of my voice. Two, just don't have the time. Three, just can't. And Ida is almost 400 pages, but I did, before the copy editing went back, I read every single page out loud over several weeks. And the letters I always read out loud. I'm sitting in my kitchen, and I would often, when my husband was come in or he would be prepping dinner, I would read a letter. I'd be like, okay, how does this letter sound? From Louis Brown to, especially the letters from the men to her, because the voices are a little different. And some of them are trying to be kind of fresh. And some of them, the guy she loves, Charles S. Morris, in the end, she says something in the diaries, and Paula Giddings has this in her great award-winning Ida biography, that Charles basically put something in a letter about women who don't keep house well and how important that is. And at this point, Ida's being called the princess of the press. Like, her editorials are setting the nation on fire. And she's like, you can talk to me about keeping house? Like, she knows what that is messaging, that if they are to continue, she has to be a traditional wife. So I was reading that letter out loud to my husband, and he was giving me notes and stuff. So that was like a really fun part for me of the process.
Well, I'm now even more impressed because I thought that you must have had all these court, and I'm thinking, where are these archives? This is incredible that all this exists. I didn't realize that you wrote those letters because, again, the cover of the book, at least the cover that I have, has a lot of letters. Like it's Ida set against the letters. So that's such a part of it.
I actually pitched that to them. And there's a couple of newspapers too. And you see the New York Age, which was the most famous Black newspaper of the era. I mean, I love this cover.
So we didn't get to the answer of the question though, because I think I interrupted you. Who did you want to read it? Like, who are you writing for?
Honestly, I'm writing for everyone who loves the story of becoming. I love reading biographies because I love to see how lives are constructed. There's a really old book that is one that I've come back to again and again throughout my career. It's called Composing a Life, and it's by Mary Catherine Bateson. And her mother was the anthropologist Margaret Mead, who, as a side note, did an amazing book with James Baldwin about a conversation about race. But that book, I remember reading it like when I was in college, and it was all about the lives of 5 women and how they keep balance and all that kind of stuff. And so in some ways, I think this is a book about how do you find your purpose? How do you find your North Star? How do you cope with grief? One of my favorite uncles, who was like a second father to me, died about halfway through the making of this book. And I had such a profound feeling of grief. And I mean, it sounds obvious, but he was older. He had been sick for a long time, but I kind of thought he'd be sick for like another 10 years. Like I thought it was going to be an ongoing thing. And then he passed. And I realized that he was someone for whom I had almost no ambivalent feelings. He was my uncle. He used to buy me great presents. Whenever I'd come over, he'd cook for me. So when the crime that happens that really sparks Ida's anti-lynching career is the death of Tommy Moss, and he is her friend. And so to go back to the Tommy Moss stuff, I ended up rewriting that chapter after my uncle died. And it's like, Ida's not in Memphis when it happens, but she knows instantly what has happened and the extent of it. And I rewrote that chapter. And when I read it aloud, I just cried. And I was like, it's that famous, no laughter for the writer, no laughter for the reader, no tears for the writer, no tears for the reader. And so I feel like I was able to pour out of my life and heart into the book to try to illuminate Ida's life and heart. And so I just feel like the book is for that. The book is for anyone who's curious about the life of someone who is making her way in a very particular place and time.
I'm sorry to hear about your uncle, but that scene, I knew that was the impetus for Ida's really getting involved in the anti-lynching work. But reading it as, first of all, we met Tommy earlier in the story. So he wasn't just like, I've always read about it like someone she knew, a friend of hers. But I cried at that part of the book, Veronica. Like, I was like, not Tommy. And I just, and his wife and his, like I said, you completely humanized Ida B. Wells from this like incredible, powerful figure to a human being. I have started collecting Black writer biographies because I too am interested in their origin stories, if you will. But I think what's so important about this book is that Ida B. Wells is the change maker, right? She's an activist, but you made her human. And so other humans can read that, other writers can read that and see themselves and see that you don't have to be born a superstar. You don't have to be born with this like fire already in your belly. That's what I just think was so powerful about this story, is seeing the origin story of how somebody, takes up these causes.
What did you say? Superstar?
I said you don't have to be born a superstar or born with a fire in your belly, that you can be moved to do the things that eventually will be seen by historians as incredible, iconic history making. But Ida was moved by her love of her friend and her outrage that something so horrible could happen. But it was because of her friendship and because of her already burgeoning career as a writer that these two things come together, and then it launches.
Yeah, I think what you said struck a chord in me, and I wanted to share something that a friend told me. And she said, "You are never given a dream without being given the capacity to pursue the dream. You may not always achieve it." And I said to her, I said, "Well, I want to be a gymnast, but I'm never going to be one." And so, I was like, "What do you mean?" Like I was kind of calling bullshit on it. And she says, "I doubt that you wake up in the morning dreaming about being a gymnast. I doubt that you walk down the street and imagine yourself doing cartwheels." She goes, "I'm not just talking about things that cross your mind as a, wouldn't that be cool? It's more the thing that like is in you all the time." And I will say that I did an event a few weeks ago around Ida. And one of the things I told people is that because I have a full-time job, I always keep a little notebook in every purse, or sometimes I have these, I'll show you, even though people can't see it. I have these tiny little note cards I get from E. Francis Paper. I love them so much. And sometimes I'll just, if I'm carrying a super cute tiny bag, I'll put like 10 of these in my purse, and I'll just write down 2 sentences I'm working on. And if I'm at the theater or waiting for someone at a restaurant or stuck on a train, I'll be like, okay, these sentences need work, or this little section, like what's happening here? What is the tension? I'll work on something 2 sentences at a time because it's always in me. So I think that's the extent to which my friend is talking about. You aren't given a dream without the capacity to work on a dream. And I think one of the things that I most love about being a writer is there's more capacity now. Like you can make a movie with your iPhone. But when I was starting out, you needed money to make a film. You needed a crew. You needed to get some sort of deal or raise something Spike Lee style independent. Writing is always paper and pen. I wrote every draft of Ida and I write every draft of every book completely by hand. So I have all these Ida notebooks all around the house. And so that is like no money. And again, it goes back to the thing where I always feel like I may not have everything everyone else has, but I have my time and I can apply that. And to hypertext to one of my celebrity memoirs, one of the best ones I ever worked on for me personally, the best experiences was I did a book with Michael Strahan, and he is a very special individual. I mean, I think he is one of the most extraordinary people I've ever met. And because I think he is that way on and off camera, but I also feel like he's just an amazing thinker, an amazing person, an amazing human being to engage with. Like he is just, everything sparks in him. And he said something to me once that I put in the book is he said, there's more power in your attitude than in your bank account, no matter how much money you have. And he goes, if you have the attitude where you come into each day like grateful, joyful, open to people, alert, curious, humble, graceful. I think about grace a lot, and ready to do the work, then you will make some traction. And it may just be that you create something for yourself. Um, if all that ever happens is I wrote Ida and 10 people read it, I would still say this book was the book of my life. Like this book changed my life. It changed the way I walked through history. It changed my relationship to her. It made me in conversation. It starts at the opera because Age of Innocence starts at the opera. So when I read that Ida loved opera, like I'm like one line in the Memphis Diaries. And I mean, she's writing all the time. I saw this opera. I saw this opera. I saw this opera. But she doesn't really say like a lot. But I know she loves the theater. I know she loves the dark. I'm thinking, what is she getting from this? And so, all of that changed me for the better. And so I would urge people to make a personal goal for each project, and you decide what you hope to get out of it. And then everything else happens with the world. The world does as it will do. But you make your goal and you decide where your wins are. And I think that's really, for me, the only way I can live as a creative person.
Oh my God. That is the sermon right there. That's going on the cards. I love that. And we were going to jump into writing habits and practice. And one of the things I was going to ask was, just some of your writing habits, and the idea of writing by hand is killing me. I can't believe you do that. That's incredible. I'm impressed. Fully impressed.
Yeah. But can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
Don't you feel like when you're typing, you're editing as you go along? Or are you able to type and not look at word count? Are you able to type and not delete?
It's an intentional practice that I have cultivated, because not naturally did I just write and not look back.
Yeah.
But let's talk about you, not me.
Yeah.
Veronica, what we all want to know. So we know you handwrite. We know that you're very efficient with your time, that even when you're on the subway, you may be writing 2 lines at a time. And I love that. And I hope everybody heard what Veronica said, is that time is her most valuable asset. And so she doesn't waste it. So even if she's only writing 2 lines at a time, 2 lines at a time turns into a page, turns into a chapter, turns into a whole book. But we want to know, Veronica, when you're not writing on the subway or in transit, do you eat snacks? Do you drink beverages? Is there music playing in the background? Tell us what your optimal situation for writing is like.
So I had to teach myself how to be a morning writer. And I used to be a night person. And now when I'm in the thick of drafting, my great time is 5 to 8 in the morning. And I need 5 because my kid gets up. It used to be 6:30, and I just need like an hour and a half before she gets up and is in the world and doing her thing and pulling. And then she leaves for school, and then maybe I can go back. But if I wait till she's up, then I'm waiting till she leaves for school, and then I'm really like behind. So I try to give myself that every morning, when I'm writing. So that could be 6 months at a time, and then a month off, and then again. I also, one of the things I do is I make a playlist for every book. And the reason I do that is, one, I'm trying to let other things influence me, like Julia Cameron talks about an artist's way, taking yourself on artist dates. And I know you do that. I love your little book shopping. I don't mean to say little, I don't mean to be diminutive, but your cute book shopping videos. You're so good at videos on Instagram. I'm terrible. I wish I could. I just take a picture and write a long caption. But please follow me at VV Chambers, because I love to be followed. Anyway,
Links will be in the show notes.
So one of the things about the playlist is that it allows me to draw from other artists to shape the texture of the book. And the Ida playlist is really special to me because I write in the kitchen, and there's certain songs that the minute I hear them, I just am back in Ida land. And so I think there's something about setting yourself up so that it becomes a ritual. You hear something. I'm very auditory, and I'm also very sensory. I usually have a candle going, and I had a particular scent for Ida, and they were all based on the fact that she was a woman in the 1800s. But the first song on my Ida playlist is Come On in My Kitchen, the cover by Cassandra Wilson. And by the time I got 5 songs in, I don't really even hear the music anymore, but it's just letting it be.
So you actually play it while you're writing. It's playing in the background.
Yeah. And sometimes I turn it down or pause once I'm really, really into it. But when I'm just getting out my notebooks, getting my tea ready, the 15 minutes of puttering, it's a thing. And then sometimes there's the first section is really the setup section. So there's a lot of Cassandra Wilson and things like that. And then songs I really liked at the time. Ida was always beefing with the young women. She has tough times sometimes with her female friendships because she's headstrong, and it was a real revelation to me that she was a Victorian woman. I kept Googling, well, how long was the Victorian age? It was long, right? And she is squarely in that. So I had Anti-Hero by Taylor Swift on there because like when these women are like doing the politics of respectability and she's like, it's like, yeah, you're right. It's me, like she has this confidence and she's willing to go up against them. And then I did a bunch of, after Chadwick Boseman died, I really felt like the second Wakanda movie had such a sense of grief and loss. And I really used that to help me write the second half of the book, where she's just driven by this sense of peril and how is she going to find her bravery and how is she going to like sell this case and make things better. And so things like Thames' cover of No Woman, No Cry, Burna Boy Alone, Fireboy DML. Every time I hear Coming Back for You, now I think of Ida and Tommy. It helped me just dig in. And I feel like we're also ADHD now, right? Like there's our phones and our families and screens. But like if I turn on the music and I'm alone and it's early morning, I really can feel like transported and I'm in a very still place where I can feel really creative about the writing.
And I think that's really important for people to know what kinds of extra things that we do have to do to get ourselves in the mood to write. Just like you would get yourself in the mood to exercise. You don't like wake up at 5 a.m. like, ooh, let me go pound that pavement. We have music to do that for us. And we should think of music being able to do the same thing with our writing. So, all right, Veronica, last question. What would you tell emerging BIPOC writers today who want to get their first book published and continuously hear things like there's publishing industry is really hard to break into if you're of color, if your subject matter is about people of color, there's just, it's a racist system. What would you tell them as a person of color who has often written about people of color, collaborated with people of color? What advice would you give them? Not craft advice, but what mental advice would you give them about being persistent and believing that there is a possibility, or maybe you don't think there's a possibility for publishing in today's marketplace?
I think a lot of things. I mean, one, I don't know that everyone has to start with a book. One of the things that I most love doing even now is contributing to anthologies. Could you start with an essay or a short story and try to get that placed? I do love the contest section of Poets and Writers is really great. And I also, I was having breakfast with someone and I was talking about Baldwin for the Arts, which, is that amazing fellowship space that Jackie Woodson created. Could you start with going on fellowship for a week, going to a writer's retreat and just applying for that? And, there's so many writers' retreats now. There's a website called resartiste.org, you probably know it, that has writers' retreats all over the world. And so could you start with that and let that be the beginning of a conversation? One thing that I did when I was trying to do the Ida book, and I still kind of come back to sometimes, is I try to do one thing a day in pursuit of my dreams. And I think thinking broadly about what that is, as opposed to it just being one finish line of a book contract, is really important.
That's super useful and super helpful. And I know that I remember, I've been following your career since forever. And I feel like I remember you doing certain writing retreats and just different things. And like I said, this is for everybody listening, this is how you build a literary life. It's not the one book. It's not the big contract. It's all of it. And the ability to redefine it as you want it to be. And as life goes, your interests change and so on. And I think Veronica is such a perfect example of that. So Veronica, how can people follow you, follow your career, buy one of your 20 books? Did you say you published 20 books?
It's $30.
30. Oh my God. 30 books.
Like half of them are books for young people, but they're still books. Yeah.
It's a book, girl. It's got a cover and pages in the middle, right? It's a book published. So how can people find all of your incredible books and follow you, because you're such a joy and delight and full of wisdom? Where should we go?
I'm mostly on Instagram at VV Chambers. I have a website, which I realize has not been updated, veronicachambers.com. And those are the two places where I hang out for now. I'm going to start a Substack, but probably not till next year.
We're actually having a Substack workshop inside of our writers community because everybody's starting a Substack, which I think they should. Speaking about one thing a day, where would you think people should purchase Ida in Love and Trouble? Do you have a favorite bookseller?
I love Little City Books in Hoboken, and they will wrap them and do a beautiful thing. So you can always email them and they will send it out.
Awesome. And just because we know you're in London, can people get the book in London and all the other places in the European?
Yeah. So it's on Amazon UK. Yeah. And it's funny. Ida had a whole London chapter to her life.
Yeah.
Which I didn't even know. And because it's not in the Memphis Diaries. Memphis Diaries kind of ends as she gets busy. I think it ends around the time she's 27, 28. Actually, there's a little bit in there. There's a lot of Ida stuff out there, but it's not something a lot of people know. So it's a really fun thing to dig into if you, like me, are living abroad,
Yes, absolutely.
She experienced that too in the 1890s. Can you imagine?
I know. That's another thing that made me really excited about her life. She and Frederick Douglass and Henry Box Brown, a lot of abolitionists came to the UK on their touring schedule. And that's something that I've just recently discovered and am interested in learning more about. All right, Veronica, thank you so much for being here. Good luck with Ida in Love and Trouble. And of course, we'll just wait for book number 31, which I'm sure will come sooner rather than later. Have a great one.
Thank you. It's been wonderful.
Okay, people, I hope you loved that conversation with Veronica Chambers. I hope that the interview left you feeling inspired and empowered. I hope you heard something in Veronica's story, or maybe even in Ida B. Wells' story, that makes you feel even more motivated to write, and that you have a stronger sense that the possibilities are many for you to craft a literary life that feels meaningful to you. Here are some other takeaways from Veronica that can help you on your writing journey. 1, your time is your most precious resource, so don't waste it. 2, don't be so eager to get your name out there as a writer that you neglect your own self-care and well-being. 3, when you're starting out in your career, or even if you're halfway through it, the conversation about success doesn't have to start with a book deal. Consider anthologies, fellowships, contests, or residencies as other ways to signal your success. 4, make a personal goal for each writing project. You decide what your wins will be for you, and then everything else is gravy. And number 5, do one thing a day in pursuit of your writing dreams. And if you do that one thing, I promise you will get to success. I hope all of these takeaways, you can incorporate them into your writing life and that you see the success that you want. Don't forget, if you want to keep in touch with Veronica Chambers and see what she's up to, follow her on Instagram or check out her website at veronicachambers.com. We will have links to everything Veronica Chambers in the show notes. And if you want to get a copy of Veronica's new book, Ida in Love and Trouble, visit your favorite independent bookseller. For example, the Read, Write, and Create online bookstore. All you have to do is look at the virtual shelf where we highlight books by authors who come on this podcast. Thank you. Thank you guys for listening, as always, to this award-winning podcast. If you're looking for more creative writing inspiration and useful resources for your literary life, then make sure you check out the Read, Write, and Create website. That's at readwriteandcreate.com. Don't forget the read is R-E-E-D. And while you're there on the website, make sure to sign up for the Read, Write, and Create newsletter, which is the place where you will find my latest classes and creative offerings, as well as other great resources to optimize your literary life. And one more thing before you go. Yes, the doors are now closed to the Read, Write, and Create Sanctuary, which is our private community for BIPOC women writers who take their writing seriously. But you can still add your name to the waiting list so you'll be the first to know when we start taking new applicants again. The link to the waiting list is also in the show notes. The Read, Write, and Create podcast is written and produced by me, Lori L. Tharps. Our editor is Brad Linder, and our theme music is by Wataboy. Until next week, writers, keep writing. The world needs more BIPOC stories written by BIPOC writers just like you.